Welcome to Real Talk San Mateo. It's both gang awareness and human trafficking awareness and prevention month. Join us as we take a deep dive into these subjects with experts in San Mateo County. On today's episode, you'll be hearing from the Human Trafficking Advocacy Coordinator and members of San Mateo Police Department's Crime Reduction Unit. These panelists interact with victims and offenders in human trafficking and gang criminal cases. Both of these crimes often overlap. Therefore, we thought it was appropriate to talk about both subjects on one episode. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope you get a lot out of this episode.
All right, well, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here today and to talk to you and others about the crime of human trafficking. My name is Pamela Estes, and I'm the Human Trafficking Advocacy Coordinator. I work with the Human Trafficking Program in San Mateo County. The program is housed in the Sheriff's Office, but we take policy and direction from the Police Chiefs and Sheriff's Association. Human trafficking is a crime under state law in California, under federal law and international law. The definition has three elements to it. Number one, there has to be someone who's trying to recruit or transport or harbor a person, which would be the victim. And then the means by which they do that is force, fraud, or coercion. And then the result of what they're trying to do through force, fraud, or coercion is to extract from that person sex acts for commercial gain or labor or services. So human trafficking many times is referred to as sex trafficking or labor trafficking, but the crime of human trafficking can encompass both of those crimes. But let's talk about what force, fraud, and coercion does mean for perhaps children in a labor trafficking situation or adults in a sex trafficking or a labor trafficking situation. Force could mean what you might think it means, force, beating, slapping, being hit, being sexually assaulted, being confined, being restrained. And fraud usually rises to a false promise, being deceitful or lying. Many times fraud will happen with someone being promised a job. So you can maybe work, 5 days a week and you work 40 hours a week. And then when you start working, you find out that the job is really 7 days a week and maybe 12 hours a day. And when you try to leave that job, you're unable to leave. And the threat against you might be that, oh, well, I'm going to tell the authorities about your undocumented status and you'll be deported. Or perhaps they threaten harm against you or your family. So that's how the fraud can come about. Also, there's in the area of our youth, there's many youth that get enticed into modeling contracts. Many of our youth have this idea that they want to be the instant success on Instagram or Facebook or YouTube, and they're interested in modeling contracts or being in music videos. And there are ads on Instagram and many of the social media platforms that our youth use to come and audition for a contract for a modeling role or also maybe a music video. And many times these are actually traps for sex trafficking. So they may be told, oh, we'll help your career, but you need to do this first. So that goes along with the idea of fraud. And as far as coercion can be creating a climate of fear for the victim. Coercion is one of the ones that's more difficult to understand because what we're dealing with is the state of mind of the individual. And so what is creating fear in the mind of the individual? A lot of times that can be related to even their culture or their ethnicity, because there are cultural factors that play into the ability to coerce another person. It can be emotional abuse. So force, fraud, and coercion, those are the three elements that you're looking for, with the exception of sex trafficking of children. And hopefully that's helpful in helping you understand what goes into those elements. The trafficker puts them in a situation and creates an environment where they want to stay in that situation because coming out of that situation may end up being worse, or there's always a threat that that's a worse situation. So consent is many times not consent. Consent is often coercion. So it really takes some time and energy to build a rapport with the victim, and maybe even multiple interviews to get to the bottom of what's really happening. So as we mentioned earlier, one of the elements of human trafficking is force, fraud, and coercion. But I do want to identify for you one exception. When it comes to youth, anyone under the age of 18, there is no need to show force, fraud, and coercion, because youth do not have the capacity, the legal capacity to consent to sex trafficking. So no force, fraud, and coercion is required for sex trafficking of anyone under the age of 18. And one thing I want to make clear is that sex trafficking is child abuse. So if you are aware of any child who is being trafficked or potentially is being trafficked, that's a reportable offense. And the best course of action would be to call the San Mateo County Child Protective Services hotline to report what you know. You know, it's really interesting that we sometimes want to put a face on the victim of human trafficking, but anybody can be a victim of human trafficking. In San Mateo County, we have children who have been trafficked, adults who've been trafficked, boys, girls, men and women, people born in the United States, and immigrants or foreign nationals. So there's not one face to human trafficking. It could be immigrant populations, people who are in the group of poverty, homeless, youth, runaways. Anyone who's in a marginalized group has a higher vulnerability for trafficking. Many times, victims of human trafficking do not self-identify as a victim of human trafficking. They believe they're dealing with the consequences of their own poor decisions, and often they're unable to recognize when they're in the middle of this situation that the trafficker is exerting force, fraud, or coercion on them. Many times, traffickers will get their victims involved in other criminal activity, such as drugs, theft, to make them distrustful of the police and bring on shame related to their own other criminal activity. Many times they don't reach out for help because they don't believe help is there. Many times they have developed a relationship and a bond with the trafficker, and they believe that the trafficker is their only means of support. It's also easy for these victims to distrust police because often their traffickers have told them that the police will put them in jail if they report this crime. If it relates to immigrants, they're often told that they will be deported if they go to law enforcement. And that's something I want to make sure you understand is not true. Victims of human trafficking are protected from being deported. So if a person is undocumented, has an undocumented status, they should not be afraid to report the crime of human trafficking. Traffickers are very manipulative, and they will try to meet the need of the victim, whatever that need is. If that need is a father figure, they'll be the father figure. If that need is the friend, they'll be the friend. They are very manipulative in identifying in their victim what is their vulnerability, what is it that they need, and then they try to fill that need for the victim. And then it becomes an exchange of I'll do this for you, but you have to do this for me. And many of the victims don't understand that's not a healthy relationship. And so they get roped into this relationship and roped into this lifestyle. That's also, I think, one of the things that makes the recovery and the trauma that human trafficking victims suffer so difficult to deal with is that it's abuse, but it's abuse inside the context of a relationship. And that's sometimes much more difficult to break away from and also to recover from. A lot of victims are moved around just to keep them off guard and to keep them dependent on the trafficker. So it's really difficult for them to find a way to break away. Even they could be walking past you in a store or on the street and maybe would be afraid to reach out to help because of the potential abuse or retribution by the trafficker. As a victim, we have a national human trafficking hotline. It's 1-888-373-7888. And there's also a text number that can be reached as well. And the wonderful thing about this hotline number is that it can be used anywhere in the United States. So if you're a victim of trafficking and you may not know what city you're in today or tomorrow, it's a number that you can use to seek out help, to report your victimization. They can report to law enforcement if you need help immediately, or if you would just like some to find out what services are available in your area. And I do want to stress that if you do have an immediate need, that you really should call 911. The trafficking hotline is a very helpful number, but they're not always able to dispatch police in your area immediately. So if there's an immediate problem, please call 911. The other thing about the human trafficking hotline as a citizen is that many times you may not be aware of a trafficking situation in your own hometown because you're in your very comfortable environment of your neighborhood, but you might encounter something if you're out on a business trip in another city or state, or perhaps even on vacation, staying in hotels, etc. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline is a great resource then, because you don't have to stop and think about, oh, what jurisdiction should I call, etc. You can always call the National Human Trafficking Hotline to report suspicious activity. But again, I stress, if you know someone's in immediate danger, please call 911. First of all, I want to advocate for education and prevention, because it's so much better, obviously, to not get into this situation. And as a parent, I think it's great if you can understand the signs of human trafficking and the risk factors for youth, so that you're keeping in touch with your kids and you're understanding the cultural influences that they're dealing with, and also just the number of people that have access to your children through social media, through video games, the messages that they're getting culturally through music, being able to understand that and then have conversations with them about what your values are and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable and what's healthy and what's not healthy. So I just would really like to stress parents to not be afraid to have conversations early and often with your kids, just about all of these topics. If they don't learn it from you, they're going to learn it from somebody else. So it's best that parents be on the front lines with these conversations with their kids. Second, if you do believe that your child is at risk of trafficking, or maybe even has been trafficked or participated in trafficking, I want to stress compassion and grace. You are dealing with youth, and you are dealing with children who are not fully mentally developed. They're very impressionable. They are going to make mistakes. It's just part of youth and growing up. What they need from you is a listening ear, and they need your compassion. They don't need to be blamed. They don't need to be shamed. Questions like, oh, you should have known better, puts a lot of pressure on them. And so I think having a listening ear and seeking help for them if they have been trafficked, getting trauma-informed care for them is really important, and continuing a conversation with them. There have been victims who've talked about the fact that when they had been trafficked and then had been identified and recovered, it was a conversation that they were never able to have with their parents. And that was very difficult in their healing. So it's very important as parents to talk to your kids, listen to your kids, also believe your kids. In healing from trauma, one of the most important things that initiates the recovery is actually being believed by those loved ones around them. You can get help from Child Protective Services. They have resources. They contract with organizations within the county that can help parents navigate this very difficult road and help them understand better how to care for their children. Well, where does human trafficking happen? It can happen anywhere that there's privacy and where people are not going to be suspected. So it can, with regard to sex trafficking, it can happen in apartment buildings. People rent apartments. It can happen in residences, residential neighborhoods. People rent houses and they run brothels out of homes. It can happen in illicit massage businesses. It can also happen in strip clubs, pornography. The pornographic filming of people can end up being the way human trafficking is perpetuated. And then with regard to labor trafficking, it can happen in the construction industry. We have a case in the San Mateo County right now that's being prosecuted against owners of a home health care center and a child care center who had been trafficking employees for 7 years or more. And so it can happen in the hotel industry. It can happen with cleaning crews. It can also happen in the agricultural industry. So labor trafficking is prevalent in many, many legitimate businesses. And so you as a consumer or a patron of these businesses, if you suspect trafficking, it's best not to approach the business owner or the potential trafficker, but to call the police, call 911 if you see someone that's in immediate danger, or also call the human trafficking hotline to provide a report. And that's one of the things I want to stress about providing reports. The National Human Trafficking Hotline supports about 120 languages. It's a 24/7 hotline, so you can call any time of the day or night. It also allows you to leave anonymous tips. So you're not putting yourself in danger if you feel that you might be threatened by making a report. And the other thing I want to also stress is reporting suspicious circumstances. Sometimes you may think, oh, I don't really know what I'm seeing. I don't think I have enough to file a report. Well, I'm going to encourage you to go ahead and file a report because you don't know what someone else may see who's filing a report. And your piece that you're providing might be that missing puzzle piece. So please report what you know and be as descriptive as you can in reporting. Give as many facts as you can in reporting, and that would go a long way in being really helpful. And when you report, you're actually being a voice for the victim. So please, please report what you see. So many people wonder if human trafficking happens in San Mateo County. And the answer is absolutely yes, it does in all forms, sex trafficking and labor trafficking. Sex trafficking and labor trafficking of children and adults, of US born citizens and foreign nationals. When John Vanek and I started in the human trafficking program in January of 2018, one of the things that we wanted to do was to determine the scope and prevalence of human trafficking in San Mateo County. We conducted a survey of nonprofits, agencies, and other agencies that served victims of human trafficking. And during the years 2015 through 2017, we determined that there were 102 persons who had been victimized by trafficking. That may not sound like many to you, but that's actually quite a number of people. And when you consider that those are the people that were identified, we have to wonder how many people are continuing to be victimized who haven't been identified, who might still be in the shadows. For the year 2018, it was determined that there were 130 persons during that year who had been identified as victims of human trafficking in San Mateo County. And in the year 2019, the number jumped to 304. So during the year 2019, 304 people in our county were identified as victims of human trafficking. That's almost one a day, that's 6 a week. So yes, human trafficking does happen in San Mateo County. So as I said before, it happens in plain sight and many times under our noses, which is why it's really important for us as citizens to learn about this crime and to understand how to spot it.
Traffickers look for three characteristics when choosing a victim: vulnerability, accessibility, and one who won't report. Human traffickers know where to look for, how to engage, and oftentimes know their victims. Once a victim is chosen, the trafficker will begin the grooming phase. The victim will have their emotional needs met and will often be given things that they need or desire. Like other human traffickers, street gangs use the same grooming techniques. Victims will be given positive attention, money, sometimes drugs or alcohol, and a sense of family or purpose. Once trust is established, the trafficker will convince the victim or use force to initiate the victim in sex trafficking, also known as prostitution. Gangs get into sex trafficking for money, and this money pays for the maintenance of the criminal enterprise, guns, drugs, and alcohol. No skill is needed, and it's easy money. There's low overhead and steady demand. Unlike drugs that can only be sold and used once, sex victims can be sold repeatedly, and these girls are usually between the ages of 14 to 18 years old. It's easy for gangs to traffic female victims because it's not uncommon for young women to be hanging around young men. Therefore, it tends to be less evident to police. If police conduct a traffic stop and find illegal drugs in the car, that's a clear crime. But instead, you find a couple in the car, detection would be harder if nothing appeared amiss. Most victims will be too intimidated to say anything in the presence of the trafficker, even if a patrol officer conducts a private interview of the victim. Victims will be too scared or even loyal to the gang to tell police what's happening to them. And because of this, there's less risk when it comes to sex trafficking for gangs versus other means of generating income, so it's just as prevalent. Police take many missing person reports annually surrounding teenage girls, and a lot of these girls have boyfriends who are gang members. These girls may be unhappy at home and find solace in the gang, filling a need. In order to keep getting what they feel they're lacking, these girls will oftentimes sacrifice their virtue to make their boyfriends happy and do anything that they ask. This may be sexually related, but also includes carrying firearms and/or drugs on their persons to prevent detection by police. They feel like they're doing what they need to earn the support of their gang. To those who join the gang, males included, the gang effectively becomes family.
Gangs here in San Mateo are representative of gangs across the nation. Our gangs are smaller though, and our officers work around the clock to identify members and help fight gang activity. Primarily in San Mateo, we have both Hispanic and Polynesian gangs who feud within their groups. Our Hispanic gangs are Northerners versus Southerners, just like other places, but our Polynesian gangs are more affiliated specifically with areas of San Mateo, like the East Side versus West Side. In San Mateo, you won't usually see a Hispanic gang feuding with a Polynesian gang. They both also feud with gangs from other cities, and unfortunately, our city can suffer from retaliatory acts. The types of crimes affiliated with gang life may include assaults, vandalisms, underage drinking and smoking, narcotic sales and use, human trafficking, and retaliation. If these crimes are done in furtherance of the gang, then in addition to the primary charges they face, a gang enhancement charge may also be added. Gang members are usually recruited young, generally out of middle school. A typical gang member is anywhere from 13 to 30 years old. They've most likely been jumped in, meaning they were involved in a physical fight to prove or test their loyalty to the gang for entry, or they may have committed some other type of crime to prove themselves worthy. Most teens join gangs because it fulfills something they feel they're lacking in their personal life. It could be friendship, a sense of family, or maybe they just think it's cool. Some indicators of gang involvement include tattoos consistent with gang symbols like dots or numbers, or Old English lettering, initials that aren't monograms, carrying bandanas of any color these days, the wearing of rosaries, or clothing specific in color, or sports jerseys and hats when they aren't even sports fans. It's important to know in the past, wearing red or blue was a telltale sign of gang affiliation. However, most have gone to basic black and white to prevent detection. Hand signals are another sign of gang affiliation. If a parent suspects their teen is a member of a gang, they should try and set limits on bad behavior and provide consequences, know their teen's friends well, communicate openly and listen actively, find good ways to occupy their free time, or partner with schools, organizations, and experts in the field to help. Here in San Mateo, we do a good job of trying to balance prevention, intervention, and suppression efforts. For our youth, we have the San Mateo Police Activities League, and our school resource officers teach the gang resistance and education training program to all 6th graders in our public schools. Our diversion program works with the low-level first offender youth to keep them out of the juvenile justice system. We've been also working with apartment complex owners and landlords to reduce or eliminate gang violence in our neighborhoods. SMPD also utilizes our crime reduction unit, patrol officers, and the county's gang task force to address graffiti, violence, and quality of life issues through things such as high visibility enforcement, passing checks, property walkthroughs and saturation, and assigning officers overtime to address hotspots. While we may not be able to prevent isolated targeted attacks, our proactivity does lend to taking guns, drugs, and dangerous people off of our streets. Our community can help fight gang activity by reporting gang graffiti, knowing the signs of gang affiliation, and reporting gang-related crimes directly to us.
This crime is not, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. So anything that you can do to help another person and help them be more educated, be connected to more resources, have a stronger relationship with healthy relationship with adults is preventing human trafficking. Anything you can do to help another person be less vulnerable in this world is human trafficking prevention. So everybody can get involved.
Well, this concludes this episode of Real Talk San Mateo. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you found this information to be helpful and that it better prepares you to identify and report suspicious activity in your neighborhood. Join us next month for Real Talk San Mateo. We're hosting a listening session and we'll have a panel of experts to answer your questions and listen to your concerns. As always, we're here if you need us in the meantime. Follow us on social media, Nextdoor, and Nixle for information about upcoming meetings. Also, if you have any questions about today's episode, please feel free to email us at pdpio@cityofsanmateo.org. Thank you very much and stay safe.